Imagine a man walking through a quiet train station in Rome, 1947. He wears a borrowed priest's cassock, the collar slightly askewed. His hands tremble as he clutches foreign papers stamped with the crest of the International Red Cross. In his pocket, a one-way ticket to Buenos Aires. To the station guards, he is Father Helmut Greger, a missionary bound for South America. But history will remember him by another name, Joseph Mengele. This is the story of the Ratlines, the secret escape routes that allowed hundreds of Nazi war criminals to flee justice after World War II. A web of priests, diplomats, spies, and opportunists that stretched from the ruins of Europe to the jungles of South America. A story not of how evil dies, but how it learns to disappear. May 1945. Germany is on fire. Berlin has fallen. Hitler is dead. The Reich had promised 1,000 years that lasted barely 12. In the chaos of the surrender, millions of people, soldiers, refugees, collaborators, flood across Europe. The victors march east and west. The defeated scatter, desperate to survive. Among them, move men whose names will live forever in infamy. Gestapo officers, SS commanders, camp administrators, doctors who experimented on prisoners. They know the Allies have lists, and that the Nuremberg trials will not be kind. The hunt begins almost immediately. American and British forces track high-ranking Nazis, rounding them up for interrogation. The Soviets, too, are seizing prisoners, though their justice is swift and brutal. But there are too many fugitives, too many broken borders, too much confusion. Europe is rubble, and in the rubble, men can vanish. Some disguise themselves as laborers. Others steal the identities of dead soldiers or priests. And some are already planning escape, not just to hide, but to rebuild. They call their underground routes Die Ratlines, the Ratlines. The first Ratlines began almost accidentally. In Austria and northern Italy, Allied occupied zones were flooded with displaced persons, millions of them. Prisoners of war, refugees from Eastern Europe, concentration camp survivors. Amid the chaos, it was easy for someone to blend in, to reinvent themselves. The Allies set up camps to manage the flood of humanity, but documentation is a nightmare. In the black market of Salzburg, you can buy a birth certificate, a ration card, even a priest identity. And in this confusion, a strange network takes shape. Not entirely planned, not entirely moral. It involves priests who pity German refugees, officials who despise the Soviets, and intelligence officers who see opportunity in ex-Nazis with anti-communist credentials. At its heart, one city becomes the crossroads of escape: Rome. The Eternal City is divided among Allied authorities, but governed by the Vatican sovereignty. And in the corridors of its convents and refugee offices, the rat line begins to take formal shape. One of the darkest and most controversial aspects of the post-war years, the Vatican's indirect role in Nazi escapes. To be clear, there is no evidence that Pope Pius XII ordered or condoned helping war criminals, but within the church's bureaucracy, a number of priests and bishops acted on their own, sometimes out of charity, sometimes ideology, sometimes both. The key figure is Bishop Aldous Hudel, rector of the German College in Rome. Austrian by birth, Hudel is an ardent nationalist and deeply anti-communist. He believes that many of the Nazi soldiers were misguided idealists, not monsters. From his residence near the Vatican, Hudel uses the church channels to issue travel documents, certificates identifying the bearers as refugees under Catholic protection. He works with the Pontificia Commission di Assistenza, a Vatican relief office meant to help displaced persons. But Hugel's refugees include men like Franz Stengel, Commandant of Treblinka, Gustav Wagner, Deputy of Solbauer, and Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon. With Red Cross travel papers and the Vatican's endorsement, they move freely through post-war Italy, stepping stones towards Spain or Argentina. The irony is bitter. While survivors of the camps struggle for food and papers, their tormentors are blessed and hidden by men of faith. In later years, the Vatican would claim ignorance. Hudel himself would write in his memoirs that he felt no guilt, believed he had saved the true sons of Europe from Bolshevism. To him, the moral war was over, but the ideological one had just begun. As the 1940s faded into the 1950s, a new line divides the world: East and West, communism and capitalism. And for both sides, old enemies start to look like useful assets. The United States and its allies are desperate for intelligence on the Soviet Union. The Soviet bloc, meanwhile, hunts for scientific talent. In the race for the future, morality becomes negotiable. Operation Paperclip, run by the US intelligence, recruits Nazi scientists and engineers, men like Werner von Braun, to work on rockets and weapons. Officially, they are cleansed of their past. Unofficially, the message is clear: some Nazis are worth saving. This same logic steeps into the Ratlines. Former SS officers who claim anti-communist credentials find sympathetic ears among Western intelligence officers stationed in Austria and Italy. They are fed, housed, and sometimes quietly given clearance to leave Europe. The Ratlines, once improvised, now become institutional. With new passports, ex-Nazis begin boarding ships bound for South America. They vanish into a new world, one far from Nuremberg. For decades, rumors swirled of a single vast organization behind the Nazis' escape, a secret order known as Odessa, or Organization of Former SS Members. Some historians dismiss it as a myth, a name invented later by journalists and novelists. Others argue that while there is no single hierarchy, there were indeed a network, an overlapping web of sympathizers, businessmen, clergy, and ex-officers who coordinated flights, funds, and identities. In truth, the Ratlines functioned less as a military operation and more like a chain of favors. A priest signs a form, a shipping clerk looks the other way, a banker wires funds to Buenos Aires, a port official stamps a false passport. Each small act, insignificant of its own, adds up to mass escape, and at the center of this web sits Argentina. Under President Juan Domingo Perón, Argentina became the most welcoming destination for fleeing Nazis. Perón admired fascist discipline and dreams of modernizing his nation with European talent. He opens the door to German immigrants, and among them, hundreds of former Nazis slip in under assumed names. They arrive in Buenos Aires, Mendoza. They find jobs in factories, farms, universities. Some live quietly. Others form little enclaves whispering about the old days, still convinced that the Reich was betrayed rather than defeated. Mengele, the Angel of Death, lives under the alias Gregor Fischer, running a farm, then a pharmacy. Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the Holocaust, works at a Mercedes-Benz plant in the suburbs. Klaus Barbie becomes a security advisor in Bolivia, training police in torture. South America becomes a continent of ghosts, a place where history hides in plain sight. For decades, these men live untouched until the hunters come. The post-war generation grows up with unanswered questions. In the 1950s and 1960s, as the world moves on, Holocaust survivors began demanding that justice be finished, that those who escaped must be found. Among them is Simon Wiesenthal, a survivor of Mauthausen, who dedicated his life to tracking war criminals. Operating from a small office in Vienna, he gathers fragments of intelligence, interviews, and sightings. He passes his information to Israel and West German authorities. His persistence leads to one of the most famous manhunts in history, the capture of Adolf Eichmann in 1960. Israeli agents from Mossad locate Eichmann in Argentina, living under the name Ricardo Kiltment. They abduct him, smuggle him out of the country, and put him on trial in Jerusalem. The trial is broadcast worldwide, a reckoning not only with one man, but with the silence that allows so many to escape. After Eichmann, others are found: Barbie in Bolivia, Stagel in Brazil, Wagner in Paraguay, but many, perhaps most, die in exile, unpunished. The Ratlines had worked well. By the time the last fugitives are gone, the world has changed beyond recognition. The Cold War ends, the archives open, and in dusty boxes across Europe, fragments of the Ratlines are found. Vatican letters, Red Cross papers, shipping logs, faded photographs. Piece by piece, historians reconstruct the network. It was never a single organization, but something more dangerous. A convergence of apathy, ideology, and convenience. The priests who signed the false papers told themselves they were saving souls. The officials who turned a blind eye said they were fighting communism. The nations that offered refuge said they were building peace. But behind each justification stood a darker truth. Evil rarely vanishes. It dissipates. The Ratlines remind us that sometimes the debris drifts everywhere, carried across oceans, hidden behind new names. In Rome, the convent that once sheltered fugitives now hosts tours of students of history. In Buenos Aires, quiet neighborhoods that housed war criminals hum with life, unaware of the ghosts beneath their streets. And in Vienna, Wiesenthal's files sit in archives, a testament to what memory and persistence can achieve. History is not only about what happened, it is about what was allowed to happen. The Ratlines were not just escape routes for men, they were escape routes for conscience, proof that even the greatest evil, humanity still chose denial over justice. But the truth, like the past, always finds a way to resurface. Sometimes it takes decades, sometimes a lifetime. But in the end, the concrete cracks, the papers surface, and the ghosts are named. Because history, like the earth beneath Berlin, does not forget. Argentina was where the Nazis decided to go with the Ratlines. And now, look at what has happening to Argentina. Are we going to let history happen all over again? Is humanity going to choose denial over justice?